Greetings! Welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we have another tanning project. Now, before I get into the project, I do want to apologize a little bit. My external microphone just died, and this is time sensitive, so there's nothing for it but to just go forth and do the thing. So, you might need to turn up your sound a little bit. It'll be better on the next video, I promise. Now, what we're doing today is working with a hog hide. I was just gifted this hide this morning by a local butcher shop, and it was such a pretty pattern that I decided to do this as a hair-on skin. Now, this hide is already all the way fleshed out, okay? You can see it's nice and clean, but it's very, very fatty still, right? Because it's a hog hide. This is one of the fattiest animals that you will ever work with. So, what we need to do is we need to get this to a place where the hair follicles shrink around the hair itself so that the hair doesn't slip. Otherwise, you're losing the whole point of doing a hair-on tan. So, there's two ways to do this. When you have a hide which is not a fatty pig hide, you can just take it and stretch it and dry it. And the drying action itself will shrink those hair follicles in, and then you just have to be careful that you don't do anything that will make it slip later on. However, with a really greasy hide like this, if you try to dry it while it's still in the grease, what you're going to have happen is, best case scenario, all the hair falls out, but you still have some leather left. Worst case scenario, the leather just shreds to ribbons, because this is called grease burn, and it happens because the grease gets in and causes the layers of collagen fiber to delaminate. So it breaks apart the felt that is your finished sheet of leather. Okay? So we need to make this shrink down on and lock the hair in. So I'm going to make a tawing degreasing solution. Now, this process is compatible with any other tanning method that you could want to do. So you can do this prior to a full alum tan. You can do this prior to a bark tan. You can even do this and make kind of cheap buckskin if you want, right? So this doesn't preclude any other future tanning step, okay? I'm going to make 4 gallons of this solution. So, in true cooking show fashion, I have pre-made buckets of stuff. First, we have 2.5 gallons of water. Just plain tap water. Okay? Next, we want it acidic. We want it very acidic so that the grain shrinks down and hardens around the hair. And to accomplish that, I'm just putting in some vinegar. I have a half gallon of vinegar. If I had a full gallon, I'd use it. But I ran out of vinegar, so we're going with a half gallon. It'll be fine. This is preserving a skin. This is not rocket science. Right, so assume all measurements are approximate. Okay, so that's going to guarantee we have acidity. Next, we have a half gallon of water that has had 2 cups of borax dissolved in it. This is going to give us a bit of detergent action. Borax is a good detergent extender, and it will sanitize the hide. It'll kill any fungi or bacteria that are in there. Okay? And then lastly, we have the key tawing ingredient, which is alum, aluminum sulfate. Again, I just boiled a half gallon of water with 4 cups of alum. The standard ratio of alum to water is a cup of alum to a gallon of water. I'm making 4 gallons of solution, so I have 4 cups of alum. Okay? Now I'm going to test this with my hands. With all that cold, it's plenty warm enough. This is like baby bottle warm, which is where we want it. Now, the last ingredient is dish soap. So here's a full cup of dish soap, the key ingredient to this. And we're just going to pretend that that edit clip you just saw was not me forgetting the key ingredient and going back into the house to get it. So, in goes the dish soap. this is going to accomplish our degreasing activity. Now, you'll see a lot of alum tan recipes have salt in them. The sulfuric acid that's generated over time by the alum needs a buffer. Most tanning recipes use salt as that buffer. But I need a strong detergent action to this. Adding salt will increase the ionic strength of the water. I'm already doing that a lot with the alum and some with the borax. The higher the higher the ionic strength of the solution becomes, the more difficult it's going to be for the soap to liberate those fatty molecules. Okay, because lipids don't like high ionic strength solutions. This is basic chemistry, right? So I'm using the borax as a buffer because it also has some detergent action instead of the salt as a mitigating factor for the aluminum sulfate. Okay. Now, in goes the hide. We're going to put this in. We're just going to make sure it's well submerged. We're going to slosh it around a bit. And the key thing here is to get all the surfaces wetted. And to make sure there aren't any air bubbles that are forcing it to float. Okay? Now, when you do this with a lot of fur skins, even something like a deer skin, the hair is going to absorb a lot of the water, and you'll need a lot more water than you think you should. But this is a hog hide. Hog hair is uniquely hydrophobic. Okay? So it's not going to absorb in this. It's just going to float around. Okay? So in she goes. Make sure it's all good and wetted. And that's going to clean up our hide for us. Okay? So, this is going to sit, and I'm going to come down once a day for a week or so and slosh this around a little bit to make sure that my solution is in good contact with the hide, that we can truly defat this whole hide. Okay? And I'll show you how it works out and what the final result of this is. Okay, so this has been a couple of weeks here in this mixture, and you can see it's turned cloudy on us, right? So this is a combination of the fats being pulled out of the hide and the like some of the dissolved organic stuff coming out, forming a flock with the aluminum. Okay. Now, that means that we are, one, successfully on our way to defatting this hide, and two, that the aluminum is all bound up and no longer free and active as a tanning chemical. Okay? So, once you form the flock, it's doing things other than tanning. So, sitting around and allowing it to sit in the same old forever really isn't all that productive. So, there's a couple of options at this point. You can see we're starting to turn the hide white, so tanning is progressing, but this is not fully tanned at this point. So if I was going to fully tan this with the alum solution, it would be time to take it. There's some membrane still sticking to it. Scrape it again, and then I would go forward and do a paste tan to finish this off. What I actually want to do, though, is to finish this off with a bark or vegetable tan. So I am simply going to dry it out at this stage and come back later on, re-wet the rawhide, re-wet the dried rawhide. I will remembrane it then and proceed from that point. So this has accomplished the cleaning that I needed it to do at this point. We'll dry it, and I will show you what it looks like dried, and how nice this is at getting rid of those fats. So I'm going to rinse it, dry it, and you'll see the result. So it's about a week after I prepared that black and brown hog hide for hair-on tanning. Now today I was just given some more pig hides by the same butcher shop I got the last hide from. Only these are kind of white and very thinly haired, so there's no real reason to want to do these as a hair-on hide. So I'm going to do these hair-off. They're, again, just as greasy as the other, and they have been, of course, fleshed already at this point. There's no substitute for good fleshing. These took me about an hour to hour and a half each to flesh. It's just work that you have to do if you want to do some tanning. Now for these, I am going to go directly to lime paste, bucking, okay? We've talked about bucking before on the channel. I'll make sure there's a link in the end screen to the video where we do that. But what I have here in this bucket is simply lime and water, roughly 50-50 until it's just pourable, and a high-tech stirring utensil, okay? So it's on you to go find your own high-tech stirring utensil. Do wear gloves with this, and do make sure that you're using hydrated lime, often sometimes called builder's lime, not an agricultural lime. That won't work for this. And we're going to pour some of this onto the hide. And then with the gloved hand, and you do very much want to have a gloved hand, spread this all out to the edges. Okay? Now, in addition to removing the hair, since this solution is extremely basic, hydrated lime is calcium hydroxide, it will saponify the fats. When I'm working with the acidic solution, you need to have a soap in there to emulsify the fats. But when I'm working with a basic solution, and this is an extremely basic solution, hence the gloves, I don't want to dissolve my own skin. The base will react with the fats to saponify them, so instead of using soap to dissolve fats, we're just turning the fats into soap right in place. So for a hair-off hide, you don't have to do that extra step. You do want to make sure that you get this out to all of the edges. There are a few cuts from skinning the animals. These were already skinned out when I got them, but no shade is being thrown. Pigs are really hard critters to skin. And this middle strip down the back is absolutely perfect. So we will get some real nice leather out of these when all is said and done. The fleshing of a pig hide is the same as the fleshing of a deer hide. I already have videos on that. Again, I'll make sure that you have a link to that playlist and some of those videos here at the end. But what you do want is, in addition to the dull fleshing knife, you want to make sure that you have a sharp butcher knife. along for the job. Because there are chunks of fat and really hard gristly fat that you're gonna need a little extra help with. So you can just take the butcher knife, and you don't want to cut all the way to the skin, but you can trim off some of the thickness of the fat. Slime is good for the soil, so I'm not worried about getting a little on the grass. And it doesn't produce a disposal hazard of any sort. Okay. Now we've smeared the line. Next thing we want to do is fold this in half, flesh side to flesh side. I love my new apron for this, by the way. This is just an inexpensive dairy milking apron. Does the job. Now I'm going to fold the hide up and give her a roll, and we will let that line do its work and come back when the hair begins to slip. These hides have been in the lime paste for about a month now. I think they would have been ready about a week ago, actually, but I didn't have time. So we're doing them when we can do them. The lime does a really good job of preserving them, as well as making the hair fall out. So when I look at this, it takes basically no effort to pull, and in a lot of places you can just kind of slough it off just by petting it. Right? That's what you want. Now, the only difference between what I'm about to do here and what I've done before in the dehairing videos on this channel is on this hide, I want to keep the grain intact. So before, I've taken the fleshing knife, angle down, and dig in, because you want to get under and scrape off the grain layer. Now, it's not sharp, right? I'm doing this with force. It's not sharp at all, but it will get in and dig under, okay? This hide, I want it to be full grain. So all I want to do is pull the hairs out. So just take it, and instead of pointing it forward down, I'm going to point it at myself kind of back and just use it like a squeegee. Okay? And you can see that takes the hair out nicely and quickly. Okay? Now, I've got a couple spots where it dried out a little bit on me, and a couple of spots where it's a little bit discolored. Those two things are related to each other. It tends to get discolored because you'll get some other bacteria growth and other things happening as it starts to dry out and collect dirt and whatnot. I'm not worried about the little bit of discoloration because I'm going to bark tan this, and the bark will be darker and dye it darker than the discoloration that's occurred. Okay? So not worried about that. The other thing that can happen is when it dries out, it'll kind of lock the hairs in a little bit, and it can be difficult to get all of the last little micro whiskers scraped off, okay? Don't be tempted to bore down and shove to try and get every last one of those little micro whiskers. This is going to go through the same soaking, deliming, and pickling with multiple scuttings that I've shown before in other videos. As it rehydrates and you start scudding it, most of those will come out. If they don't, it's usually because you didn't have enough lime on it. If you didn't have enough lime on it, it usually means that it's at the edge where it doesn't really matter, because that's not going to be in your finished pieces. I'm going to keep scraping this hide, then I'm flipping them over and scraping as much of the lime paste as I can get off of the back. Then, as I mentioned, they're going to get soaked in water
multiple times, soaked in vinegar to pickle them and fully delime them. And then I will show you the final result.
We are pretty close to done with the initial preparation of these 4 pig hides. This video clip, just for a sense of time, this video clip is about a month and a half after the first video clip when I got this first hide. I got this first hide and was working on it for 2 weeks before I started these 3 hides. Okay? So it's not an interminable amount of time, but working with hides does take time. The different chemical solutions take time to do their job, right? You can't shorten this sort of preparation into just a 1-week activity, let alone a 1 or 2 day activity, okay? So these are all going to be bark tanned. In a couple of weeks, we're talking with some local loggers. We're going to get a load of hemlock logs. Part of that is going to turn into fence boards to expand our pastures and help my family repair some of their pastures. But we're going to strip the bark off of that and show the process of tanning. And all 4 of these are going to be bark tan. This will be hair on bark tan. This will be hair off bark tan. The hemlock tan liquor will stain these hides a really nice, warm, reddish brown. And it may or may not stain these white hairs, but I'm okay with that either way. If they stay white, I'm cool with it. If they're not white and they're that nice reddish brown, I'm still cool with it, right? So we're going to go through with this one. So this is about the size of a deer hide, just for perspective. This is what deer hides tend to shrink down to. Some a little bit bigger than this one, some a little bit smaller than this one. It's kind of like an average deer hide. It's wrinkled up a little bit more, so when it's re-wetted, it will flatten out and gain, a couple inches in both directions. Right? So it's not as much smaller than these as it kind of looks at first glance, but it is the smallest of the 4 hides. This did the defatting solution and the initial preliminary tawing did a very nice job of removing a lot of the excess fat. But if you look at it, there's still a bunch of little fat droplets coming out. That's because the hair follicles are huge. Pig hides have huge hair follicles. And even getting all of the fat off, doing all of that scraping and that long soak, there's still a little bit of residual fat in the middle of the dermis that extrudes when it dries down. So drying the hide and then coming and literally giving it a sponge bath with some warm soapy water is part of the process. Okay? The drying is going to do the final locking in of the hair, and this is very firmly attached hair. It's not coming out on me. There's a little bit of loose hair. Most of that's actually deer hair that's just from my tanning area. Okay? It's not the hog hair itself coming out. So this did a good job of locking the hair in. The back is dark. The tanning process has started but not finished. So it hasn't been oiled and stretched out. That's what gives it its final white appearance. Or brown, since I'm going to do a bark tan. But as it dries and becomes more translucent, you can see the pigments of the black hair showing through the translucent hide. So that's why it looks black. There's a couple little spots where I can see I missed a little bit of fat right there. So I'll take a spoon and scrape a lot of that off and then go over it once more, do one more scudding after I rehydrate it for the bark tan and give it a sponge bath. Okay. So that'll be a nice hair-on hide. These also came out quite nice, and the white spots you see here, this is where it's still a little bit damp. This is where it's all the way dry. Okay. And there's no fat clinging to it, but if I run my hands across it, you can still feel that slippery oil coming out of the hair follicles. That's intrinsic to a pig hide. These will also get a nice little sponge bath on both surfaces as part of the rehydrating process. I'm not worried about these little droplets of oil doing any physical damage to the hide itself, but I will remove them
so that they don't resist the bark tan liquor and prevent it from penetrating. Okay? So, a last note is I recommend for a hobby tannery, especially if you're working alone, that these medium-sized pigs are the largest hide project that you try to take on as a solo project. Okay? The large tanneries doing large full-size cows, first, they have equipment and hoists that they're using to handle all of that weight. A cowhide would be 3 times this thickness, have a lot more hair. It's a monster to try and manipulate. These were, 60, 70, 80 pounds, somewhere in that range. A cow would be at least a third more. And even a large calf skin is going to be 100, 150 pounds. It's a lot to manage. I tried doing a full-size cow once. It kicked my butt and I wasn't able to finish the project. 2 weeks ago, I got 4 calf skins that I'm also working on. They're in buckets behind me in lime. And I tried doing them with the paste tanning solution, the paste lime, just like I did these. I got 1 done intact. The other 3, again, they kicked my butt. I cut them into 3 strips, because that I would use for, belting and that sort of, like strip leather, more than for a large patch. So I cut them in strips. I cut the belly strips off, left the back intact, and put them in liquid lime paste, right? They kicked my butt and I had to change methods and cut them down to size, okay? So it's easy to get too ambitious and bite off more than you can chew. For a hobbyist, especially a beginner hobbyist, this is the largest hide that I would recommend you try to work with as an intact hide. A calf cut into 3 pieces. A full-sized cow, I would cut into at least 4, maybe even more than 4 pieces. Right, a full-sized cow, I'd probably still try to leave like a 2-foot wide strip down the middle, maybe even a 1-foot wide strip down the middle for nice long belts for that sort of work, repairing horse harness or something like that. I might try to keep, a horse harness strip down here, and then cut this into 3 on each side, if that was a full-size cow, right? Don't bite off more than you can chew. Just a piece of advice. It's very easy to bite off more than you can chew. I've done it, and I've had my butt kicked. Okay? That cow I ended up just having to dump out, and I thought, well, I'll dump this out, let it dry, come back to it later. But Black Bear had other designs and drug it off and shredded it before I got back to it. That was the fate of that project, right? It happens. But I'm also going to say, do try projects. Give yourself permission to try and fail and learn from it, okay? And if you do try and bite off more than you can chew, don't be discouraged and come back to it with something a little bit smaller, okay? So, with that, I'm going to cut this video off. I hope that you have enjoyed this. I will see you next time with bark in hand here at Old Ways Rising.